Snowflakes the size of cigarette ashes drifted sideways in the blue-gray dusk, and I could taste their sting in the corner of my mouth as the last supply chute popped open overhead. One lonely canopy, luminous tangerine against a sky already bruising toward night, whumped, hesitated, then sagged in the crosswind, flinging its bundle toward the tree line. "There she goes," I muttered, though nobody heard me over the howling gusts. We'd been praying for bandoliers and K-rations. Rumor said the bundle held mostly powdered milk. Never saw men run so fast for calcium. Every boot in Charlie Company sloshed over the ridge, ankles vanishing in knee-deep powder that squeaked like dry sand. The pines on either side of the clearing creaked under their own snowpack, flexing like old men's knees. Above the treetops, a flight of C-47s droned south, engines fading to a hum, and then nothing. Birds fleeing a storm they'd helped conjure. I lumbered after the others, Thompson clacking against my radio pack, breath curling in sudden clouds that vanished before I could suck them back in. 3 days without a real meal, and still I sprinted, because once the sun went down, the Krauts would zero their mortars on any fool skylined in open snow. The chute slammed groundward, its cords snapping like piano wires. Barnes, short kid from Jersey who swore he'd boxed Joe Lewis's barber once, reached the canister first and whooped. "Ammo!" he yelled, banging his glove against the olive shell. 2 more troopers dragged the container by its lashing straps while I kept lookout, heart thumping to the distant rhythm of howitzer booms. Somewhere southeast, the big red one was answering back. Their rounds echoed in the valley a half beat after the flash. Like an argument, no one could win. Closer by, I heard the fragile crackle of our hand-crank radios. Click, click, whir, each squad leader calling roll in bursts of static. My own SCR-300 weighed heavier than usual, straps cutting trenches through my coat, but its silence carried a different heft. We hadn't raised division in 12 hours. Batteries froze, antennae iced. Maybe Jerry was jamming. Or maybe HQ wanted to forget Bastogne even existed. Either way, the airwaves felt thick as congealed gravy. Powdered milk turned out to be half the haul after all. We piled the metal tins like hockey pucks along the tree line, cracking jokes about luxury lattes at the Hotel Ardennes. The real treasure came nestled beneath. Bandoliers of 30-06 and a few belts for the Brownings. Green cloth ribbons, stiff with cold like dirty party streamers. Barnes kissed one, frost clinging to his lip. Softly, "Tell me that's not romance," he said. Someone else answered by belching a line from White Christmas, and for a moment our laughter mingled with the wind. Honest and ugly, proof we were still human. We broke into teams to shuttle the loot back up the slope toward town, dead-legging through drifts that swallowed our gaiters whole. Each step made a muffled thwomp, pause, thwomp. Beneath that, the deeper percussion of boots striking buried branches echoed in my thigh bones. Halfway up the incline, I slipped, landed on my radio, and spat a string of curses that frosted midair. Kowalski hauled me upright with one mitt and smirked, teasing. "Scratch the radio, Pruitt, and we'll have to talk to each other all night." Gallows humor, currency richer than cigarettes. Atop the rise, the medieval roofs of Bastogne, hunched under snow, chimneys issuing feeble smoke like wounded locomotives. We dug foxholes in back gardens, posted BARs behind stone walls that once kept goats from wandering off. Children's sled tracks were fossilized in ice beneath our boots. I stepped wide of them, as though breaking that innocence would jinx us worse than the surrounding panzers. Far off, single rifle shots popped, scouts testing range, or maybe just nerves fraying in the cold. You start hearing ghosts when the mercury bottoms out. Inside our makeshift command dugout, a root cellar that smelled of turnips and cordite, we laid the ammo where the colonel's staff could inventory it by flashlight. A mess tin clinked as Doc Tate ladled out a stew of beans and snowmelt, thin enough to read through. He sprinkled in a spoon of the fresh-dropped milk with a flourish. Jokingly, "Bon appetit, gentlemen. Cow juice a la parachute." It tasted like wet chalk, but it was warm, and the warmth slid down my throat and disappeared before it reached my belly. I thumbed the handset stitched to my chest harness and murmured our call sign, letting the words ride out on a breath I couldn't spare. Static. I cranked the generator handle, wrist aching from earlier tries, and the set squealed, a pig dying slow. Had to shout over its own feedback. "Thunder 2-1, this is Corncob, do you read? Over." Nothing. I tried again, pitching my voice lower, as if secrecy might help the signal sneak through German snow. Only wind answered. Wind and the far-off whistle. Then a crack high in the pines. Tree burst, harmless this time, showering us with frozen dust. Everyone outside ducked on instinct, and the silence after made even my failed radio feel obscenely loud. We parceled out the ammunition in squads. 1 belt here, 5 clips there, like slicing a wedding cake for 50 starving guests. Night closed around us in shades of crushed coal. Men shuffled off to their foxholes, boots dragging, whispers brittle. Somewhere a harmonica tried Silent Night and quickly gave up, reed freezing mid-note. I scraped ice from the whip antenna with a Barlow knife, watching sparks fly where metal kissed metal. Frustrated. "Talk to me," I told the set, like it was a sulking lover. The dial glowed dull orange in response, patient, mute. Wearily, the wind picked up, shoving snowflakes sideways faster than you could blink. Every pine answered with timber-deep groans, wood fibers rubbing like violin strings from hell. I tightened my scarf until beard stubble pulled, eyes watering from the cold and from something else I didn't name. An hour ago, I'd run for milk. Now I felt 60 years old and ready to bargain with any god who would thaw the horizon. Barnes reappeared, arms full of blankets liberated from some Belgian attic. Gravely, "Storm's rolling hard," he said. "You hear we're cut off again?" Annoyed, Krauts seized the damn highway. I shrugged. Bad news, Licenses, no surprise here. Joking. Cheer up, he added, nudging my radio. Soon as you sweet-talk that brick into working, Patton'll drive a Sherman right up Main Street and buy us dinner. I couldn't answer. The ether was screaming in my earphones now, wild bursts of static like frying grease. Underneath, just for a heartbeat, I thought I caught a pattern, dots and dashes swimming up from the noise. I yanked the headset off, heart popping ribs like corn kernels. Desperate, tried once more. Thunder 2-1, corncob, authentication snowball. Come in, damn you. The scream ebbed to a hush, then silence. So perfect, I could hear snow landing on the receiver case, tiny hisses that melted and died. We parceled out the ammunition in squads. 1 belt here, 5 clips there, like slicing a wedding cake for 50 starving guests. Night closed around us in shades of crushed coal. Men shuffled off to their foxholes, boots dragging, whispers brittle. Somewhere a harmonica tried Silent Night and quickly gave up, reed freezing mid-note. I scraped ice from the whip antenna with a Barlow knife, watching sparks fly where metal kissed metal. Frustrated. Talk to me, I told the set, like it was a sulking lover. The dial glowed dull orange in response, patient, mute. Wearily, the wind picked up, shoving snowflakes sideways faster than you could blink. Every pine answered with timber-deep groans, wood fibers rubbing like violin strings from hell. I tightened my scarf until beard stubble pulled, eyes watering from the cold and from something else I didn't name. An hour ago, I'd run for milk. Now I felt 60 years old and ready to bargain with any god who would thaw the horizon. Barnes reappeared, arms full of blankets liberated from some Belgian attic. Gravely. "Storm's rolling hard," he said. "You hear we're cut off again?" Annoyed. Krauts seized the damn highway. I shrugged. Bad news, licenses, no surprise here. Joking. Cheer up, he added, nudging my radio. Soon as you sweet-talk that brick into working, Patton'll drive a Sherman right up Main Street and buy us dinner. I couldn't answer. The ether was screaming in my earphones now, wild bursts of static like frying grease. Underneath, just for a heartbeat, I thought I caught a pattern, dots and dashes swimming up from the noise. I yanked the headset off, heart popping ribs like corn kernels. Desperate, tried once more. Thunder 2-1, corncob, authentication snowball. Come in, damn you. The scream ebbed to a hush, then silence. So perfect, I could hear snow landing on the receiver case, tiny hisses that melted and died. Behind me, the blizzard finally unfurled, a wall of white, swallowing the treetops and the church spire in one breath. Rifles vanished under rime, even men's silhouettes blurred, blending into a single gray smear. Thoughtful. If Jerry chose to attack now, he'd be on us before we smelled his cigarettes. I wrapped my gloved fingers around the crank and gave it one more soul-tired spin, but the dynamo only whirred like a toy whose child had wandered off. Somewhere between the branches, a pine split from the weight of ice, snapping like a giant bone. I flinched, radio pressed to my chest, And for a second, the silence afterward felt deeper than any shell hole. That's when it hit me. Whatever message was trying to reach us just got smothered by weather or will. Orders, intel, Christmas blessings, sad, didn't matter. We were deaf in the dark, a hollow place on the map no one could pronounce, and the enemy was listening to that same emptiness from the other side of the snow. I pulled my collar up, feeling the handful of rounds in my pocket, and stared into the blinding white swirl where the sky had been. Silence has a sound all its own, and tonight it rumbled louder than artillery. Tomorrow I have to make this radio talk, or we'll remain ghosts, locked in a coffin carved from ice and pine. The blizzard fought us all night, hammering the rooftops like a god gone drunk. But dawn finally peeled back the darkness, thin, washed out, nothing you'd call daylight except by charity. Snowdrifts slouched against every wall in town, burying doorways to the lintels. I dozed maybe 10 minutes, cheek glued to the radio case, eardrums still ringing with that impossible silence. When I opened my eyes, Barnes was standing over me, face iced up like a busted windshield. "Colonel wants to set on higher ground," he said. "You're heading to the church spire. Congratulations, you're our new bell ringer." "Long way to go just to get ignored," I muttered, but I was already lacing boots, flexing toes to make sure they still belonged to me. Warming batteries under an armpit while tying knots in a circus trick they never teach in jump school. The church loomed at the center of Bastogne like a stone anvil, Gothic arches frozen mid-prayer. Its front doors hung half open, snow creeping over pews in rippled dunes. Inside smelled of sulfur, wet wool, and candle smoke that hadn't burned in weeks. A stained glass St. Michael glared down, the kind of glare that says, "Don't chip the paint while you're bleeding all over my altar." The ladder up to the belfry was slick. Each rung bit through my gloves. Kowalski climbed ahead, hauling a coil of wire slung across his back. Every footfall sent a gritty trickle of frost and stoneflakes pattering onto my helmet. Higher up, the wind stabbed through arched slits, shoving me sideways so hard my ribs scraped stone. I hugged the radio tighter and kept climbing, breath rasping like sandpaper on tin. At the top, Bastogne lay spread beneath us. White fields, broken hedgerows, a ring of dark forest that looked too close for comfort. Smoke columns poked through the valley where yesterday there'd been barns. Someone had set a map of hell under glass and said, "Don't drop it." "Set her here," Kowalski grunted, pointing to a plank where the church bell once swung. Silence had replaced its clang. Even the pigeons were AWOL. We bolted the antenna, section by section, the aluminum snapping together with dull metallic coughs. I wedged fresh batteries, still warm from the belly pocket of my field jacket, into the tray and prayed the cold hadn't killed them on the climb. "Static check," I whispered. Click, click, whir. The generator's handle turned smoother than last night, maybe from the altitude, or maybe because desperation works as grease. A low hiss flowed into the headset, not the dead vacuum of before. Progress. I tuned down band, dragging the knob slow, hunting for anything that sounded human. A carrier wave, a cough, A foul word let slip. Snow gusts rattled the slits around us. With every gust, the hiss fluttered like a moth hitting a lampshade. Thoughtful. "How we looking?" Kowalski asked, eyes on the forest. Resigned. "Like a Sunday crossword, blank and mocking." 20 more painful degrees on the dial, and the hiss cracked. A dot. Then another. Then a spatter of Morse too quick to grab. My heart kicked. I thumbed the send key and tapped. Urgent. "Corncob. Bastogne. Do you read?" Over. Waited. The wind whistled so high it sounded like feedback. Then dash dot dot dash. Gibberish. Followed by a steady, clear string, authoritative. "Thunder 2-1 to all outposts. Authenticate vanilla." My pulse nearly blew out my ear seals. Excited. "Holy hell, we got 'em!" I blurted. I shot back the proper response code, my hand shaking so bad the dots looked like dashes, and leaned in. Urgent. "Request artillery intel, status resupply, enemy disposition, send traffic, over." Static gnawed half the reply, but enough slipped through.
"Last road cut. Armor massing northeast woods. Hold fast."
A pause, then a fragment that froze the marrow in my teeth.
"Line encircled. No withdrawal."
Kowalski's grin evaporated. Did they say encircled? I nodded once. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. Far off, from the tree line, came a boom that didn't belong to friendly guns. A shell sailed overhead, low whistle, then detonated somewhere behind town, shaking loose centuries of dust from the rafters. We ducked as splinters of stained glass clattered around us. St. Michael lost half a wing. The shards tinkled onto the bell deck like cheap applause. Kowalski peeked out the firing slit. Contact distance? Hard to tell. I went back to the set. Thunder 2-1 requesting grid on enemy concentrations. A burst of squeal drowned the net. Then a different voice came through, oily and precise, calling my own alias in accented English. "Corncob, this is Thunder 2-1. You are advised to surrender for humane treatment. Your situation is hopeless." Every syllable dripped smugness. German operators spoofing our call signs, proof they'd broken into the circuit. Kowalski's knuckles whitened around his garand. "They're spoofing us, Jesus!" I swung the mic again, voice low, pitching only to friendly ears. Urgent, lowered voice. "All stations, disregard previous. Break, break. Thunder 2-1, authenticate beer keg." Static. Nothing. The German taunt didn't repeat. Only that low hiss returned, now flavored with faint music. Maybe a Berlin broadcast drifting on the ionosphere, some crackling waltz that mocked the frozen silence below. "Hear that?" Kowalski murmured. "Yeah." I tightened the gain, but the dance tune just fluttered away. We rigged a second field wire down the ladder so runners could plug telephones straight into my set, redundancy in case jamming got worse. Each time I leaned out to secure a line, wind needled my eyes until tears froze on lashes. Below, squads hurried trench to trench, shoulders hunched, head swiveling for phantom armor. Mortar pits thumped intermittent greeting cards at the woods. Each thump pumped steam from snow-covered muzzles like locomotive stacks. By noon, the sun tried to shine, a pale coin sinking in milk. I logged every transmission fragment, stuffing scratch sheets into my breast pocket where body heat might keep ink from clotting. Barnes climbed up, later with a thermos of something that pretended to be coffee and actually tasted of burnt chicory. He slurped, then smirked. If the krauts don't kill us, this brew's got a good shot. Batteries are dying faster than we can warm them, I sighed. Signal drops every 5 minutes. Feel like I'm talking to ghosts. Maybe ghosts will send hot chow. He offered a cigarette. We lit up, cupping flames against the gale. Smoke curled away instantly, snagged by the wind and shredded. Shortly after, a new call bled in, weak, whining through static like a wounded animal. Copperhead to Corn Cob! Enemy armor columns crossing rail spur! Grid 7-4! Request immediate fire mission! Their signal faded before I could reply. I pounded the key anyway, praying electrons would crawl the distance. The horizon answered with the dull roar of engines, lots of them. I caught a glimpse between pines, black shapes gliding over snow, too square to be trucks, too wide to be half-tracks. My stomach performed tightropes, tanks, most likely. The ring wasn't just closing, it was thickening. I radioed the intel, my voice cracking harder than the ice under those panzer treads. Division ordered us to hold and relay bearings for artillery once guns could range them. Copy all, I said, though I wanted to scream. With what shells? Our field pieces were down to scavenged rounds. Some crews were loading shrapnel tricked up with saw blades. Mid-afternoon, a flight of Luftwaffe fighters buzzed the town, yellow-snouted Messerschmitts snarling like wasps. The church tower shook from strafing nearby street corners, stone chips ricocheting up here like hail. I flattened against the bell wall, antenna vibrating above like a tuning fork. Between bursts, I caught a faint, urgent Morse string, friendly this time, code proper. Resupply inbound tonight, if weather breaks. Marker flares red, white, red. Hold perimeter at any cost. I tapped acknowledgement, heart bouncing against ribs. Resupply meant ammo, maybe med packs, maybe, dare I hope, dry socks. It also meant flares lighting us up like a county fair if the clouds cleared. Enemy gunners would see the same fireworks. Dusk snuck back, violet and bruised. Snow had stopped falling, but the temp dropped until metal skinned my gloves with frost. The batteries finally gave their last sigh. The set burped, then blacked out. I popped the hatch, slid them out like dead fish, and jammed them into my armpits once more. That's when I heard it, distant yet definite. The clank of track links, rhythm steady, greedy. Through the firing slit, tiny sparks glimmered in the forest like cigarettes in a theater. Tank exhausts catching last light. They were forming up, not a probe this time, but a push. Below, the company runners yelled for latest coordinates. I couldn't answer until the radio lived again. I squeezed the batteries harder, willing warmth into cold lead. Nothing. The horizon rumbled louder. Even St. Michael seemed to lean away from the window. Kowalski met my eyes, grimly. If they break through those lines... Frustrated. I know. I shoved the battery tray back in, slapped the case. Dead. Out at the edge of town, a single flare shot up. White star burning against the dark, hanging like God's own spotlight. The tanks turned their turrets toward the glow. I cranked the generator as fast as my numb wrist allowed, teeth rattling. Static sputtered, then cleared just enough for me to spit one urgent, frantic call into the void. Corncob to Thunder 2-1, armor assault forming, grid 6-2, request fire for effect. The response was a hiss, neutral as a shrug, while below, the timber line exploded with the thunder of engines rolling. Our world balanced on seconds, waiting for shells we couldn't be sure would come. My thumb stayed on the transmit key, knuckles white. The moment stretched, so thin it could snap, and all I could think was, if this battery dies before the guns answer, the ring closes for good. The battery slumped to life just as the first German shell clawed a row house off the street below. The explosion sent shards of brick hurtling past the belfry slits, peppering the tower like buckshot. I didn't duck. No time. I thumbed the key, voice ragged. Thunder 2-1, fire mission, armor concentration grid, 629er, danger close. Repeat, danger close. Static curled, then a clipped reply I'd have kissed if it were flesh. Shot, over. Kowalski exhaled something halfway between a prayer and profanity. We counted the seconds, 8, 9, 10, until the horizon flashed white and a concussion wave punched the tower's ribs. The bell chains rattled like panic-struck bones. Through the slit, I saw geysers of snow and soil climbing around the foremost tanks. One turret peeled open like a tin can, but the rest kept crawling, black silhouettes against the drifting glare, locusts unfazed by thunder. I stayed on the net, requesting adjust rounds, feeding fresh grids as the panzers fanned out. Division guns answered, slow, sporadic, shells chewing stripes through the forest, but never enough to break the column. When my batteries finally died for good, I stuffed the corpse cells into a mitten and kicked the ladder. Time to leave, before they register the tower, I said. Kowalski didn't argue. We slung the radio carcass between us, descending while plaster dust snowed from every rafter's hit. The nave below looked like Judgment Day on layaway. Pews tossed, stained glass littering the aisle in jewel-bright confetti. Outside, a gust knifed through the doors and carried the smell of cordite and pine sap turned to resin by fire. Street level was a maze of half-collapsed walls and foxholes hacked into frozen gardens. Paratroopers darted between cover, boot soles thudding in muffled rhythm. Thump, pause, thump, the sound swallowed by powder. Every few seconds, small arms cracked, flat and sharp, followed by the throaty chatter of an MG-42 from somewhere just past the hedges. The ring was tightening, each report another stitch pulled in our hem. We dragged the dead set to the battalion CP, a cellar lit by a single carbide lamp that flickered like it regretted the effort. The colonel's map lay on a barrel lid, edges weighted by 45 magazines. Red pencil arcs circled the town like nooses. Overnight, they had merged into one thick scar. Somebody penciled X's where roadblocks used to be. Most were scratched out again, overrun, or simply vanished under drift and tread. The colonel jabbed a finger at the shortest approach. They're probing here and here, armor in front, infantry behind. We hold until air opens a hole or Patton arrives. No fallback positions. Nothing left to fall back to. His eyes, bloodshot and glittering, swept the room as if daring anyone to disagree. No one did. I reported the radio's death, offered the last grid notes. He nodded once, handed me a mess tin half full of lukewarm beans that tasted of copper coins. Tiredly, warm those batteries and yourself, Pruitt. When the next drop comes, you're back on the line. Beans swallowed. I set to resuscitating the cells, nestled them against my ribs, knit my parka tight, and paced the cellar to keep blood moving. Boots scuffed the stone, echoing with a hollow clink that matched the distant clinking of men reloading BAR mags topside. Somewhere upstairs, Doc Tate cursed gently. Either a wound or another tin of milk burst from the cold. The afternoon crawled. With every boom, the lamp shivered. With every lull, our breath came louder, as though the town itself inhaled between punches. Finally, Barnes barreled in, cheeks raw, dragging 2 new batteries like twin newborns delivered by a stork in khaki. Found him in the drop zone. Ammo crate mismarked, he panted, disgusted. Powdered milk my foot. We stuffed a cell into the set, coaxed the filament glow, and cranked. Static greeted us. Alive. Mercifully alive. I worked the dial. On the low band, a flurry of Morse danced. Friendly artillery nets crowded with pleas for shells they didn't have. I slid higher, skimming across enemy propaganda. Wehrmacht voices promising hot soup and peace if we surrendered. Kept climbing until an American drawl cut through like a saw. Static. Parade ground calling any Bastogne station. Over. Urgent. Shouting. Parade ground. This is Corncob Actual, I barked, knuckles whitening. Strained. We are encircled. Armor pressing from northeast. Strength heavy. Request immediate resupply by air. Priority ammo and plasma. Weather broken. Visibility fair. The answer came ragged but steady. Radio voice. Determined. Corncob. Parade ground. Copy encircled. Air attempting drop at 1900 hours if flak permits. Mark with red, white, red flares. Keep perimeter lit. Out. I relayed the word up the cellar stairs. Cheers filtered back down. Weary but real. Hope, rationed in spoonfuls, tasted sweeter than any K-ration chocolate. Evening sneaked in wearing a coat of gun-smoke gray. The forest beyond town flickered with muzzle flashes, tiny orange blots in the gloom. The wind rose, keening through alleyways, dragging loose roof tin so it shrieked like a wounded hinge. Every pine at the edge of fields groaned under ice, trunks popping as though the woods themselves felt the siege. My squad rotated to the eastern perimeter, taking over a line of bombed-out cottages overlooking a snow-swamped orchard. Deep powder muffled our footsteps. Our breaths came in quick white bursts that vanished faster than we could shape curses. We slid into foxholes, backs to dirt, eyes on the tree line where the panzers had stalled after the afternoon barrage. They sat dark now, engines idling low, exhaust pluming in ghost columns, blunt silhouettes, patient, waiting. Every so often one turret flexed, snout sniffing the dark, and a shell whistled overhead to burst in the far side of town with a hollow whomp. Tree-burst shrapnel rattled down through distant roofs like sleet on tin. Between salvos we listened. Wind moaned, ice cracked. Somewhere a church bell, knocked loose earlier, clanged two forlorn notes each time recoil shook the tower frame. Barnes cracked his knuckles by my ear. Jokes about collecting German helmets to use as chamber pots. We laughed without sound, shoulders heaving, teeth hidden, a mime routine of lunatics. Hours bled. My world shrank to the cold stock of the Thompson and the radio resting against my hip, humming faintly like a docile heart. At 1855, the sky, surprisingly clear, turned indigo. I twisted to Barnes. Urgent. 5 minutes. Get the flare gun ready. He loaded the tube with a red-white-red stack, thumb hovering over the striker. We waited, neck hairs bristling. Then, far west, we caught it, a distant drone, faint but undeniable. Engines. More than one. The sound swelled, 4 motors, maybe 6, bouncing off cloud bottoms we couldn't see. Hushed. Here they come, someone breathed. Barnes stood, sighted straight up. The orchard instantly became a spotlight stage, every muzzle, every helmet edge visible to any German with decent optics. He fired. The flare hissed upward, burst into a 3-tone blossom that hung above our heads like a slow-spinning carnival wheel. Red, white, red. Moments later, other flares lifted across town, an irregular constellation marking our ring. The drone climbed to a roar. Shadowy specks appeared overhead, C-47s, belly doors yawning. Parachutes blossomed, spectral shapes drifting in the dark, silk glimmering against flare light. Some canisters trailed landing lights, others just fell, ghostly in free fall, slamming earth with distant thuds. Jerry saw the show too. MG-42s opened from the woodline, tracer streaks cutting red-gold slashes across the orchard. Snow-coated trunks erupted in splinters. We dove, face in powder, bullets snapping over our shoulders with a sound like bullwhips. A mortar round whistled in, exploded short, showering us with clods that hissed as they cooled. My radio pack thumped as I hugged ground. Praying antennas didn't silhouette my spine. Flares guttered out. Darkness rushed back, but the assault had begun. German infantry poured from tree shadows, silhouettes hunched under wool capes, shapes multiplying like nightmares. Our line opened up, Garands barking, BARs growling, a 50 in the nearest cottage hammering with teeth-rattling rhythm. Muzzle flashes lit faces like strobe portraits of fear. I jammed the handset to my mouth, called for illumination rounds. The artillery net spat, terse, negative shells. I swore, toggled to mortars, same response. We were the only light available now, rifle fire strobes and burning timbers behind us. The enemy pressed forward, feet crunching snow we'd churned only minutes earlier. Between bursts I heard them breathing, foreign, desperate. Barnes shouted that he was reloading. I popped up, squeezed the Thompson trigger, stitching a row of sparks across advancing shadows. One figure folded, another spun, yet the wave continued. A grenade sailed in, chunk of potato masher silhouette, and landed atop the parapet. Barnes grabbed, flung it back. It burst mid-arc, a dull poof that showered sparks harmlessly. The attack lasted 7 minutes by my watch, but felt like 30 years. At last, whistles blew from the woodline, shrill retreat calls, and the shapes melted backward, leaving a litter of dark mounds on the snow. Our fire slackened. Ears rang with a sudden drop in decibels. After such chaos, the silence felt obscene. Kowalski crawled over, helmet dented. "Perimeter holds," he rasped, "but they'll be back before dawn." I glanced at the orchard, parachutes snagged on branches, canisters half buried in drifts, supplies for tomorrow's fight if we survived the night long enough to fetch them. Beyond them, pines groaned, swaying under unseen weight. I called division again, battery faltering but alive. Corncob to Thunder 2-1, perimeter intact, drop received, armor still parked northeast, expect renewed infantry assault. The net hissed, then a weary voice. "Hold until first light. No reinforcements able to break through tonight. Godspeed." I rested my head against the frozen parapet, eyelids twitching, breath hitching clouds that glowed faintly in muzzle flare afterglow. Wind carried the smell of cordite and pine pitch where shells had stripped bark. The ring had drawn tighter, but our circle still pulsed, thin, ragged, unbroken. Somewhere behind me, a buddy's mess tin clinked as he scooped melted snow to drink, metal tapping like a metronome, marking minutes left to dawn. I listened to that fragile rhythm, dug fingers into the radio's scratched casing, and whispered to no one, "Stay alive a little longer, old girl. We've got messages to send yet, and ghosts outside, eager to listen." Morning came thin and brittle, a pane of ice skimming the world. The flares had long died, and the orchard, lit hours ago like a carnival, lay in gray hush, parachute silk draped over limbs like ghost laundry. We shuffled through thigh-deep drifts to gather whatever the nighttime angels had dropped. Every canister felt like a secret ballot in the election between life and starvation. Most ballots read, "Maybe tomorrow." Powdered milk again, bandoliers half frozen into question marks. A crate of plasma broken by impact, blood substitute tinting the snow pink where it leaked. I jammed fingers into the crackled cardboard, scooped a shard out, whispered an apology to nobody. Across the orchard, Barnes found a box of chocolate D-bars. He held it overhead like a championship belt, until Kowalski warned him the Krauts might snipe the victor. The chocolate tasted of wax and radiator rust, but we ate 2 squares each. Luxury that glued molars together and reminded us how hunger felt when it let hope in the door. While we worked, the forest stayed unnaturally polite. No rifles, no motor revs, just the distant groan of trunks shedding ice. So quiet you could hear breath swirl inside your own scarf. Yet every step kicked up the scent of cordite buried under snow. A reminder that quiet in Bastogne was never guilty of innocence. Back in town, the perimeter had been redrawn overnight, lines tightened like belts after Thanksgiving. Foxholes, once spaced 40 yards apart, now elbowed each other. Machine gun nests moved closer, so their overlapping fields looked like Venn diagrams, scribbled by an anxious mathematician. I followed the commo wire strung between platoons, making sure nothing lay exposed above snow where a stray shell could snip it. Frost clung to the copper like silver fur. At one break in the rubble, I saw Sergeant Mercer's squad lifting a dead German over a makeshift sawhorse to strip his gear. They worked with brisk detachment, boots planted, steam puffing rhythmically. Somebody cracked a joke, something about unconditional recycling, and laughter flared, then snuffed itself out. The corpse had a wedding ring on a string around his neck. Mercer pocketed it, gruffly muttered it would buy schnapps when this circus packed up. Gallows humor, yes, but also inventory management. Everything here had a use, even a stranger's promise. I ducked into the CP cellar to swap in the resurrected batteries. The colonel's map now showed red arrows touching on all sides, and angry starfish smothering our little blue dot. He briefed us without lifting his eyes. German 5th Corps confirmed to the north. Panzer Lehr pressing east, weather holding just bad enough to clip our air cover by noon. "We're the cork in a bottle," he said gravely. "If the cork breaks, champagne spills all the way to the Meuse." I climbed out with that image fizzing behind my eyes, champagne, white and roaring, washing over foxholes. Outside, snow squeaked under fresh-issued overshoes that felt like cardboard slippers. I cranked the SCR 300, got immediate traffic, coppery clicks that solidified into code from regimental HQ. They wanted casualty figures, ammo counts, fuel status for vehicles we no longer had. I reported numbers that felt like confession. Good men converted into equations with too many unknowns. Static burned my ear while I waited for reply. Then HQ slipped a question that tasted like brass. Sternly, "Confirm ability to hold current line 48 hours without resupply." I looked at the dwindling crates stacked by the bell tower. Imagined splitting each cartridge like a loaf to feed 5,000. Still, I keyed the mic, wearily. Affirmative, holding. The word trailed off my tongue like frostbite claims toes. Quiet. Inevitable. Bonds caught me leaning against a stone fence, radio whining low. "Heard the rumor?" he said. "Jerry's offering hot coffee to anybody who strolls across the snow with hands up," he mimed, holding an invisible mug, pinky extended. I grinned, told him that coffee probably tasted like surrender and boiled socks, but the thought still warned me more than the actual socks in my boots. We moved to inspect the northeast sector where yesterday's armor had parked. 3 Tigers still smoldered in the tree line, metal blackened, snow melted to ashy slurry around the hulls. Their fellows had withdrawn just out of artillery range, leaving tread scars that crisscrossed the white like bad stitching. Through binoculars, I saw German medics hauling away their dead under Red Cross flags cut from bedsheets. A weird, courtly pause, each side arranging its fallen chess pieces before the clock resumed. From behind our ridge, the battalion chaplain appeared, coat dusted with plaster. He carried a bundle of letters for men who couldn't fetch them themselves, some wounded, some busy with barbed wire, some already zipped into canvas and waiting for the ground to thaw. He handed one to Kowalski, who stared at the envelope as if it were mined. "Open it," I said. He tucked it instead into his breast pocket. "I'll read it when there's daylight long enough to last the whole page." Mid-afternoon, the wind swapped direction, bringing a low diesel hum from the west. Recon reported German half-tracks probing secondary farm lanes, feeling for weaknesses. We pre-sighted mortar tubes, trimmed fuse lengths. Snow swallowed sound until rounds popped like firecrackers. Tiny, disconcerting. When fragments whined through the pines, the convoy veered off, leaving nothing but churned powder and a lingering smell of exhaust that mixed with pine sap like cheap cologne. The radio crackled again, division broadcasting code word, snow globe. It meant our outermost listening posts had spotted full infantry regiments massing after dark. Encirclement now official, text underlined on every map. Mercifully, they also relayed a timetable. If weather broke by dawn, thunderbolts from 9 Tactical would strafe armor columns. If not, we'd rely on field guns eking out single-digit shells. Barnes chuckled when I passed the news, said he'd wager on the sun because artillery was broke and God still owed us change. Twilight bled in like watered wine. We redistributed what ammo we'd salvaged, 5 clips here, 2 grenades there, a strip of 30 cal belts tucked inside a burlap sack so Frost couldn't spider the links. While squads dug new firing pits closer to town center, I lingered by the church ruins, watching smoke curl from roof holes where timbers smoldered beneath snow. Bells no longer rang, yet I kept hearing phantom chimes whenever the wind threaded the rafters. 3 notes, always 3, like a coded reminder that time kept passing regardless of watch hands stuck from cold. Doc Tate limped over, face gray. He'd used every morphine ampule. Next casualty would feel war raw and unedited. He asked if division mentioned medical drops. They hadn't. I lied that I'd request again. He nodded, weary, and pressed a canteen into my glove. Snow melt and iodine. Pretend it's soup. I drank, gagging at the metallic bite. Felt it seep into a stomach already gnawing itself. Full dark, settled hard. Patrols went out, pairs ghosting through orchards, ears tuned for the crunch of foreign boots. I volunteered with Kowalski, radio slung beneath my OD blanket to keep the chassis warm. We slipped along a fence of split rails glazed in moonlight, breath muffling inside scarves. Somewhere ahead a creek gurgled under ice, tiny slip of sound against the great hush. Otherwise, nothing, until a soft metallic clank drifted from the hedgerow beyond. Holding breath, we froze, rifles aimed. The clank, repeated, deliberate, measured, like someone gentle cooking a pot lid. I keyed the handset, whispered code to fire support, request for star shell. Mortars thumped behind us. Seconds later, a magnesium blossom seared overhead, turning night into blue-white noon. In that glare, we saw them. 4 enemy engineers crouched by our wire cutters half open, faces streaked with soot. For half a heartbeat, they stared, pupils pinwheeling in sudden day. Then, rifles barked. Engineers crumpled. One staggered, disappeared into the hedge. Star shell burned out. Darkness slammed back. We didn't pursue. Orders said hold line, not chase rabbits into shadows. But the message was inked. The ring wasn't merely tightening. It was probing for sutures to unpick. Formally, on return we reported the breach attempt. Sappers spread more mines, strung extra tin cans on tripwires, cheap burglar alarms for wolves in field gray. Near midnight, the temperature dove. Frost rhymed the handset vent. Whew. Each breath inside the hood fogged the goggles until I pushed them to my helmet rim. My eyelashes iced together when I blinked. Wearily, I huddled beside Barnes in a shallow scrape. Radio humming faint as a lullaby, watching for silhouettes that could have been stumps or men. Time turned viscous. Minutes stretched like tar. To stay awake, we swapped terrible childhood stories, his about stealing pies, mine about being forced to recite psalms before supper, each memory punctuated by the distant bark of an 88. Grimly, at 0300, a courier crawled in with word from HQ. Resupply canceled. Weather blown south again. Visibility nil. Gravely. Worse, ammo inventory showed some companies below 20 rounds per rifle. The courier's silhouette vanished before his words fully landed. Short pause, leaving a vacuum in the cold, big enough to swallow courage. I keyed the radio, tried to beg more bullets out of static. Division gave none. They had none. Commanding. Conserve fire. Engage only confirmed targets. Make each round matter. The line clicked off, final as a door slam. Kowalski stared at his Garand, thumbed the clip, resignedly. 8 sermons left, preacher. Barnes answered by patting his BAR like a dog he might have to put down. I closed the radio cover, breath hanging between lips that suddenly felt weightless. All around, the forest exhaled creaks that sounded like joints before collapse. Dawn still many hours away, rations shrinking to crumbs, ammo counted like coins for a toll we couldn't negotiate. And somewhere beyond the trees, the enemy tallying the same arithmetic, confident their columns could pay the final fare. A low moan of wind rolled through the pines, long, mournful, almost human. It threaded the silence, rattled empty cartridge cases, and curled into our foxhole like a prophecy spoken under its breath. I hugged the radio tight, felt my stomach knot around hunger and dread, and realized the next fight wouldn't be decided by courage or prayers, only by how many bullets we could still claim when the world turned gray gold again. And the sunrise, when it came, would find us weighing each trigger pull like silver, because by then, ammo and rations both would be thinner than the ice holding back the dark. The gray that passed for dawn froze on the rim of the world and refused to climb any higher. We'd hoped for a sun to thaw morale. Instead, we got pewter light flattened across the snow, bright enough only to guarantee shadows. The regiment's order for the morning was simple: shift the line forward 50 yards to a knoll of half-shattered pines so our mortars could rake the road beyond. 50 yards felt like 50 states. The ground between us and those trees was pocked by yesterday's shells, each crater an invitation to lie down forever. We moved anyway. Boots crunch, squeak crunch, rifles held high to keep muzzles dry. My radio set thumped against my spine, batteries numb despite the socks I'd wrapped round them. Behind me, Barnes wearily hummed jingle bells off-key, each note a puff of white that drifted away like he was giving up pieces of lung to the cold. The tune died the moment the first shell whispered through the clouds, that low, hollow whistle that turns marrow liquid even before the blast. It hit 20 yards short, snapped a 3-foot spruce in half, showered ice needles that stung like hornets. No one spoke, we just dropped flat, senses compressing to heartbeats and the hiss of disturbed snow settling back. A second shell arrived, whistle, crack. That one detonated overhead, a perfect textbook tree-burst shrapnel slashing outward in a crown of steel. The blast wind slapped the breath out of me and left my ears ringing like church bells. I'd never hear the same again. Kowalski shouted something I couldn't parse. His lips moved, but the world had slipped underwater. I watched his hand point forward, so we crawled. The pines ahead groaned, branches sagging under fresh fractures. Each new round found timber and exploded into a confetti of splinters, a party thrown for undertakers. Needles rained so thick the snow turned green in patches. Halfway to the knoll, the barrage doubled. Shells fell in threes, air convulsing, ground quaking, as though the devil below were knocking to be let up. I hugged the radio to my chest, antenna rattling my helmet. Static buzzed faintly in the phones. Some distant call sign begging for a repeat I could never give. Another burst tore open a larch 5 yards to my right. A shard of trunk cartwheeled past, buried itself blade first in the drift like an overgrown spear. "Trees are killing us more than the Krauts," Barnes yelled, voice thin and far away through the cotton in my ears. He patted the splinter sticking from his sleeve, surface wound, more insult than injury, and offered a crooked grin. Dryly, "Nature's a lousy hostess." I wanted to laugh, found only dust in my throat. Instead, I cranked the set, praying the dynamo's whir wouldn't summon more shells. Urgent. Thunder 2-1, Corncob. We are under heavy timber burst. Grid 6-3. Need smoke cover. Static clawed back. No reply. Either interference or higher-ups decided smoke was a luxury bastards could live without. Kowalski waved me on. We hit the base of the knoll just as the barrage eased, like an orchestra pausing to turn pages. Men sprawled around shattered stumps, helmets pocked by bark, faces patchworked with red where pine needle shrapnel had kissed them. One kid from Able lay curled beneath the wreck of a sapling, boots drumming snow in useless protest. Doc Tate crawled up, morphine long gone. He stuffed a rag in the kid's mouth against the screams and whispered, "Bite until you're home, son." A fresh whistle sliced the air, higher, sharper, followed by an eruption that seemed to detonate inside my skull. Light flipped black, then gray. When vision snapped back, the sky was snowing bits of radio. The whip antenna lay in 3 pieces, ceramic insulator sheared clean. My chest strap had snapped, the set rested half buried, casing dented like a kicked can. I slapped it, anger louder than fear, no response, just a feeble hiss and the sour smell of burned wiring. "Radio's toast." Weakly, I croaked. Grimly, "Not the only toast." Barnes nodded toward the tree line, where German infantry shapes slid between trunks, rifles at hip level. They'd waited for their own barrage to finish pruning the forest. Now they came to harvest what remained. Our line opened fire. Garand's cracked BARs rattled and tracers streaked through the drifting sawdust haze. The pines, already tortured, shook as bullets stitched bark and flesh alike. Enemy return fire snapped over our heads, splinters peppering cheeks with pinprick burns. I jerked the Thompson up, stitched a burst where a gray coat flickered, saw it crumple beside a stump. The fight telescoped, first a panorama, then a nightmare no wider than the tree trunk you hugged. Sound became fragments. A rifle bolt slamming forward, Kowalski's grunt as he heaved a grenade, the metallic tinkle of empties piling in the snow. No sense of time, only the drum of pulse in neck and the taste of cordite on tongue. Somewhere behind, our 60mm mortars finally coughed. Shells arced overhead and popped amid the pines, showering branches down like broken chandeliers. The Germans faltered, momentum blunted by their own blown path. We pressed, crawling tree to tree, until distance widened and the forest swallowed their retreat. Silence flowed back like water through marsh grass. I looked around, counted heads, counted holes where heads had been. 4 men from Charlie gone, maybe 5. Timber kept their names until we could carve markers. Smoke drifted between trunks in blue veils, clinging to every needle. The wind started again, gentle, pushing whispering snow off high branches so it fell in soft sighs, a parody of peace. With the sector momentarily ours, we began the grim harvest. Pockets checked, ammo belts scavenged, splinters pulled from sleeves. Doc Tate muttered he had fewer bandages than bodies. He made do with scarf strips dipped in iodine the color of rusted cider. Barnes found half a carton of German cigarettes on one body, passed them around. The tobacco tasted of mold and home at once. I knelt by my busted set, lifting it like a wounded pet. The transmitter coil had cracked clean through. Even if we had spare valves, the antenna was in pieces. Radio silence again, but this time, not by choice. I felt more naked than if I'd lost my rifle. News would move only as fast as a runner could slog through powder, and runners too often never finished the marathon. Kowalski clapped my shoulder, satisfied. "Christmas gift," he said, tilting his head to a ridge of firs beyond the knoll. There, an abandoned German supply sled lay half buried, wood planks and rope handles stamped with an eagle. We dragged it close, cut the lashings, and found 3 boxes of 792, 2 crates of canned pork, and, miracle of miracles, a tin of coffee beans sealed in wax. Barnes whistled low. "Aw, that, boys, is an angel in a can." We packed what we could carry, torched the rest so Jerry couldn't reclaim it. Flames licked cold air, sap popping like musket caps. The fire's glow painted every face carnival orange. For a moment, even the dead looked warm. Snowflakes hissed upon the embers, giving back tiny puffs of steam that smelled of resin and regret. By late afternoon, clouds thickened again, bruising purple above the treetops. We hauled our spoils downslope toward town, feet dragging, shoulders hunched. Every few yards someone glanced back, afraid the forest would spit another salvo. But the guns had gone quiet, perhaps reloading, perhaps satisfied. Their silence felt temporary as a held breath. At the outskirts, an MP waved us through a choke point of felled trees and concertina. He cracked a joke about charging toll, 1 round per head, then saw our expressions and pocketed the punchline. Inside Bastogne, chimneys that still worked coughed smoke the color of slate. Walls no shell had touched wore frost like lace. We passed a house where children's curtains still hung, patterned with blue ducks waddling across greener days. Command had re-established CP in a milk cellar after the previous one caved. I delivered the ammo counts, the coffee miracle, and the obituary list. The colonel's jaw muscle twitched, but he only nodded, penciling fresh notches on the ever-shrinking roster. He tapped a spot on the map the size of a fingernail. Wearily, "Christmas Eve tomorrow." Short pause. "If they don't crack us tonight, they'll try then." Chuckles dryly. "Nobody likes spending holidays unpaid." We dispersed to dig deeper, mend tin can alarm wires, and share the coffee. Barnes roasted beans in a helmet lid over a chunk of burning crate wood. The fragrance drifted down ruined alleys, smelled so wrong yet right, I nearly wept. We slurped the muddy brew from mess tins, grounds floating like ants, and agreed it tasted like the best damned diner in Jersey. Gallows humor sweetened each swallow. Dusk bled in. A brittle moon rose, haloed by ice crystal, bright enough to write your own eulogy. I took first radio watch in a foxhole facing the forest, Christmas Eve's doorstep. The spare set from battalion fit awkward, cables stiff, but it picked up division's heartbeat. Scattered, weak, still there. I keyed in our status, code word clearly, icicle, and got a single word back, calmly, steady. Wind shivered the pines, branches creaking like door hinges on a crypt. Somewhere to the north, an 88 barked a test shot. The shell passed overhead with that telltale sigh, fast, uncaring, before cracking miles beyond. A rehearsal, maybe, for the show tomorrow. I settled deeper into the hole, blanket over knees, Thompson across lap, and listened to the snow land on my helmet in delicate ticks. Mid-watch, the church remains began to hum, those phantom chimes again, 3 soft notes carried by wind through broken rafters. I found them oddly comforting, a half-forgotten carol threading the dark. Barnes whispered from the next hole, softly, "Hear that? Angels warming up for tomorrow's concert." I answered that if angels showed, they'd best pack bazookas. Seconds stretched, breath plumed, the forest loomed, a jagged silhouette haunted by broken trunks and the memory of steel rain. Any moment the sky could light in orange, tree bursts livid as ulcers, the world splitting noise and flame. Yet for now, only creaks, only the steady crackle of my hand crank warming batteries, and far off, a lullaby of pines swaying under secret weight. Thoughtful. I closed one eye, forcing the other to stay open, and thought of family dinners back in Ohio, where the biggest worry was turkey too dry. Tomorrow would be Christmas Eve, in name, but here in this hole, under a moon, sharp enough to cut, the feast would be coffee grounds, canned pork, and whatever courage hadn't frozen overnight. Somewhere, beyond the wire, boots might already be lining up for another push. Ominously. If the barrage comes again, the pines will sing their iron song, tree-burst hell, amplified by holiday irony. I thumbed the transmit key, sent a final test click into the void, and waited for an echo. Static only, but alive. I settled my helmet brim low, melancholy, listening to the wind rehearse those broken bells, and braced for a night that promised no gifts but survival. Dawn would bring Christmas Eve and whatever surprise the enemy wrapped in steel beneath their trees. The moon shivered behind a veil of ice crystals, and the broken bell notes that had haunted the rafters all evening died on an uptwist of wind, right before the forest found its voice again. A single 88 fired first, one arrogant thump in the distance, a low whistle that carved the air until it smashed into a far-side farmhouse. The blast flared orange inside shutterless windows, then blinked out. An instant later, every gun within 10 miles seemed to wake screaming. I barely had time to yank the radio under my chest before the sky cracked open. Shells streaked overhead so fast their trails braided like whipcord. They weren't searching for targets. They were shaving the ridge flat. Timber bursts lit the pines in dirty flashes, each concussion flinging splinters long as bayonets. The night filled with wooden shrapnel singing high notes no violin could reach. Powder-dry needles drifted on the shock waves, swirling embers without flame, landing in our hair and on the lips of the dead. "Tree burst hell," Barnes hissed, helmet ringing from the concussive slap. He'd coined the phrase 2 barrages ago, but tonight the words tasted too literal. We were trapped between a hammer above and an anvil of snow below. Every time a shell detonated in the canopy, the air itself seemed to buckle. The foxhole walls shivered like lungs, packing snow down the back of my neck. I cranked the radio on reflex, generator handle biting into my palm, even through mittens. Static roared, too loud, too bright, then flattened into a steady hiss. I keyed the button anyway, coding coordinates we'd already sent, adding urgent. "Tree bursts chewing us up. Request immediate counter battery." On the line came only distant shrieks, other sets bleeding over, men calling for medics we didn't have, one operator, the Lord's Prayer half finished before his signal vanished in a squeal. A shell burst directly above the trench lip, light ripping the universe open long enough to show Kowalski halfway through a cigarette, smoke frozen in front of his teeth. In that frame-by-frame glare, I saw jagged wood shards spinning toward us like fan blades. One tore past my cheek, clipped the radio whip, and sparred sparks across the handset cradle. The antenna tops sailed into darkness, sparrowed away by the blast. We hit mud. Elbows, knees, chin. Snow packed my nostrils. Barnes cursed, then wheezed when a fist-sized branch punched the earth between his boots. My eardrums throbbed from pressure waves. Every heartbeat sounded like a depth charge. Minutes, maybe hours blurred inside that cacophony. Fire missions from our own 105 started up at last. Duller thuds behind Bastogne. But the outgoing shells were too few, too slow, swallowed by the sheer mass of steel dropping on us. Tree trunks crashed around like toppled statues, their thuds muffled by powder so deep it behaved more like water. Ripples of snow billowed outward with each impact. When the barrage finally slackened, the silence was so sudden I thought I'd gone deaf. Snowflakes drifted again, lazy now, glowing in fitful moonlight that filtered through shredded branches. The forest was no longer a stand of pines, but a charred picket fence, stumps jagged as broken teeth. Across the line, men groaned, some calling names that didn't answer, some simply whimpering through lips too numb to shape words. Doc Tate emerged from a shell hole, silhouette hunched. dragging a canvas roll of sulfa packets and hope. He moved from shadow to shadow, sprinkling white powder into wounds that already looked white with frost. One trooper clutched his thigh where bark shrapnel stuck out like a devil's arrow. Doc snapped it clean, slapped on a bandage made from shirt sleeve. "You'll cuss later. For now, keep your blood inside." Barnes and I crawled out of our pit to survey. The radio, unbelievably, still mumbled static, though the half-sheared antenna lay sideways like a snapped bone. I wedged the broken mast into a branch stub, propping it as high as my arm would reach. The moment it steadied, a voice cut through the background hiss, weak, warbly, but English.
Outpost Bluebird, report integrity. Repeat, Bluebird, report integrity.
I mashed the transmit key. "Bluebird intact. Heavy casualties. Timber bursts ceased. Awaiting orders." It felt like pronouncing "we still existed" made it true. The reply came threaded with interference. Urgent.
Hold present line. Reinforce positions. Expect follow-up ground assault.
Then the frequency dissolved into hammered static. Ground assault. Of course, tree bursts were the overture. Infantry would be the main act. We gathered what strength we had, which wasn't much. 4 riflemen in our squad still upright, 2 BARs with half-belts left, 1 bucket of grenades clinking softly like hollow walnuts. Ammunition felt lighter than air. The cold robbed brass of all heft. Wind returned, sawing through the wrecked pines, moaning across hanging splinters that chimed like xylophone keys in no mortal scale. The snow-laden branches above, or what remained, creaked with every gust, ready to snap again at a whisper. Those groans merged with distant engine rumbles, half-tracks maneuvering, maybe tanks cycling starters for another lunge at dawn. We fell to work. Foxholes deepened with entrenching tools that clanged on frozen roots. Splinter-proof roofs went up over aid stations, stacked with salvaged doors and sandbags half ice. Every footstep sank ankle-deep into powder, already muddy with burned needles. Rifle bolts refused to cycle without urging. We sluiced them with lukewarm coffee from canteen lids, praying caffeine might double as lubricant. Somewhere beyond the trees, a German voice called orders, clear as across a summer pond. None of us spoke German well enough to translate, yet tone alone carried intent. Marshal. Advance. Finish. Barnes cocked his BAR and murmured, "They're lining up to Carroll. Let's make sure they forget the words." Time bent again, stretching into that uneasy interval before a fight when the universe holds breath. Frost grew on eyebrows. The howitzers behind town barked sporadically, tracer arcs painting crimson dashes across low clouds. Sometimes their shells landed close enough to shake new snow off bow stubs, blinding us in white curtains. We tasted nitro smoke in every inhalation until lungs felt lined with soot. Close to 0300 the attack began, not with artillery, but with the hoarse squeal of sleigh bells. For a heart-stop moment I thought fatigue had snapped my wits, but the jingle repeated, growing louder. Someone out there in the gloom was shaking a string of bells. It was grotesque, a Christmas prank fused to the collar of death. The clangor moved along the front as German sappers tested our nerves, hoping jumpy fingers would give away muzzle flashes. We didn't bite. In our foxhole, we waited, rifles level, breathing through chapped mouths parted just enough to keep vapor from fogging sights. The bells died off. Silence again. Then the crack of a single Mauser echoing into distance. Soon dozens more answered. Muzzle flashes flickered between the broken pine shafts. Brief orange tongues, here then gone. Rounds peppered our parapet, whining away into town behind us. I signaled the men with hand chops, hold fire, conserve. The temptation to blaze back was strong, but each bullet now was a ration more precious than beans. We let the enemy waste ammo on dark. Only if silhouettes closed did we squeeze triggers. The Germans must have realized we wouldn't expose ourselves. Their fire tapered, slipped into measured discipline, and then, from deeper forest, came the churn of engines across crusted snow. Assault guns trundling forward, blocking moonlight in wide wedges. Armor again, maybe Stugs, maybe Panzers still nursing yesterday's dents. Either way, they rolled slow, cautious, knowing their tanks risked bog. Infantry shadows spread ahead of them in rushes, darting from stump to stump. I grabbed the handset, whispered request for artillery smoke to screen the approach. The net coughed static, gun crews resighting, low on shells. Response, resigned. Range cut off, cannot support. A knot formed behind by a sternum so tight I thought ribs might crack just to make space. Kowalski hissed. They'll spot us in moonlight. Anxious. Any flares left? Grimly. 2 white stars. Barnes patted his belt, resigned. After that, just prayers. We waited until the lead infantry wave hit 30 paces. I shouting barked, "Now!" Barnes fired the first star shell high. It popped mid-sky, flooding the clearing in harsh magnesium glow. German figures froze, caught mid-stride like insects under a child's torch. For one electric heartbeat, their faces were masks of surprise. Then our rifles lit and shadows fell in jerky marionette collapses. Return fire howled. A tracer skated off my helmet rims, spraying sparks behind my ear and leaving the smell of burned paint. I dropped, heart hammering, ears full of my own pulse. We cycled rifles, aim, squeeze, bolt, repeat, every shot deliberate, every pull bargaining another second of perimeter life. The first flare fizzled. Darkness lunged back, yet by then the Germans had pulled into cover again, rethinking. Engines reversed, gears grinding like teeth. Maybe they believed more of us were alive than truly were. Maybe the forest itself scared them after what their own artillery had done to the trees. They melted into black, leaving only coughs of small arms and the groan of retreating steel. Finally, silence reclaimed the woods. Silence laced with moans and the soft crackle of fires from shattered stumps still smoldering beneath snowcaps. Barnes slumped beside me, bar barrel smoking faint spirals. He whispered wearily, "If that's their Christmas carol, I'll stick with Silent Night." I couldn't laugh, throat too raw. I leaned on the radio case, fingers numb, and pressed the transmit key one more time. Bluebird holding. Attack repelled. Ammo low. Static rewarded me, but within it rose a single coded click. Acknowledged. Relief tugged at eyelids heavy as lead. We were alive another hour. Dawn finally seeped into the sky, more pewter than silver, but dawn nonetheless. Christmas Eve, dawning over a forest that looked gnawed by giants. Smoke layered the horizon like breakfast gruel. Doc Tate's lantern bobbed among foxholes, checking pulses, blessing the breathing, closing the staring eyes. I stared toward Bastogne proper, where rooftops lay under fresh ash. Somewhere in town, men were scrounging for candles, planning to sing carols between shell bursts. Somewhere else, a German colonel was sharpening pencils for the next demand to surrender. And between those two worlds sat us, rifles nearly empty, stomachs hollower than the shell casings littering our feet, but still here. Barnes nudged my shoulder, nodded toward a splintered fir whose top half dangled by a fiber of bark. "Look," he said, voice rasping but soft. "Our Christmas tree." The wind picked up, nudging the broken crown until it finally let go. The top spun down in slow, wobbling grace, landing point first in the snow a few yards away. An accidental evergreen, crooked, yet somehow perfect. Branches glittering with ice that caught the pale dawn light. For a strange breath, I felt warmth bloom behind my ribs, small and stubborn. I glanced at the radio, silent again, batteries shivering. We'd need to find new ones before dusk, or we'd face the night, death. And the night would not come empty-handed. I hoisted the set, snow cascading off its dented shell, and turned toward town where fresh foxholes waited. Christmas Eve foxholes that might double as graves if luck took holiday. Behind me the forest stood scarred, still smoking, but the wind through ruined branches sounded almost like distant applause, as if the pines themselves honored any soul still upright. "Come on," I said, voice rough but standing. "Let's dig in before Santa shows." And with that, we trudged through powder that creaked like old floorboards, toward a day that promised no miracles, just the chance to endure until the stars blinked awake, and the next chorus of shells sang us into Christmas Eve proper. Christmas Eve slithered into town beneath a pale sun that never cleared the roofs, more suggestion than daylight. Every stovepipe coughed ash-gray smoke as frozen hands coaxed breakfast fires from scavenged timber. We boiled the last of the canned pork into a greasy stew, powdered milk for broth, grounds from yesterday's beans sprinkled like pepper. Tasted like rancid hope, but it was hot, and hot things kept thoughts from freezing. By mid-morning, the forest settled into a hush so complete it made the pine stumps seem guilty. No shells, no probing bursts of Mauser. Only the wind sifting through snapped branches, making them creak in slow complaint. Quiet always meant paperwork in Bastogne, either for graves or for brass. Today, it turned out to be brass. A white flag appeared on the eastern road, fluttering like a surrender lily against the charcoal tree line. Two Germans trudged beside it, helmets off, greatcoats buttoned to the chin. One carried a loudhailer, the other a canvas tube slung over his shoulder. They stopped just short of our minefield and called out in English too proper for the hour. Loudly, formal. "American Commander, we bear terms for your honorable capitulation." Their voice drifted across the snow, crisp as new linen. Within minutes, a patrol hustled them, blindfolded and shivering, toward battalion. Rumor sprinted faster. McAuliffe himself would hear the offer. We didn't rate a peak, but word trickled down the trench line like warmed whiskey. The proposition, so the whisper went, promised complete and humane treatment if we quit the field by nightfall. Barnes spat into the snow, cynically. "Humane, as in mass graves, dug before or after?" he asked, nobody in particular. 20 minutes later, another runner slid down the embankment, grin splitting frost-whitened stubble. "General's answer came in one word," he puffed. "Nuts. And HQ wants that radioed back in plain English, capital letters." Laughter rippled through the foxholes, harsh, ragged, yet somehow melodic. Even the pines chimed, icicles knocking applause against each other. I keyed the handset, muscles thawing in the small blaze of shared humor. Firmly, Thunder 2-1 from Bastogne. Nuts. Repeat, we say nuts. Static crackled like frying bacon, then a chuckle from regimental. "Copy your nuts, corn cob." A moment later, Division broadcast the reply across every channel, bouncing it like a snowball from artillery nets clear to rear echelon. You could almost hear clerks stamping it on official letterheads, "The Bastogne Nuts Bulletin. Merry Christmas from the 101st. Humor buys minutes, not bullets. By noon the shelling resumed, though lighter, testing strikes that plowed furrows just short of our outer wire. From the church ruins, a newly jury-rigged PA, speakers rescued from a movie theater, blared "I'll Be Home for Christmas" on scratchy loops, volume cranked to drown the mortars. The irony hovered over town like chimney smoke. After chow, orders came to shift patrols across the southeast orchard. Intelligence thought Krauts might tunnel under our line of wrecked cottages. Imagination fertile as frost. Kowalski, Barnes, and I drew the watch. We slogged out, snow squeaking like distant violin strings beneath boots. Each breath crystallized to glitter before vanishing. The closest thing we got to tinsel. Halfway across the orchard, a German shell, lone, lazy, arched high and burst behind us. Not close enough to kill, but loud enough to prod fate. Barnes, Jerry's aim gets worse the colder it gets. 2 steps later, a second round arrived. This one whistling so low it hummed between kneecaps. It plunged into the drift a few yards ahead, dull thunk, then fizzled. Dud. "You jinxed it," Kowalski muttered. Barnes shrugged, but his grin never reached the eyes. We moved on, checking tripwires, pounding in fresh stakes until fingers stung worse than splinters. Gusts whipped powder into miniature cyclones that stung cheeks raw. I hunched deep in my collar, antenna clicking against my steel pot like a metronome, counting heartbeats until our relief. On the trek back, silence shattered. A rifle crack, sharp as a snapped icicle, from somewhere left of the orchard lane. Barnes, "Yeah!" yelped and spun, foot caught in drift, then dropped out of sight like he'd slipped through a trapdoor. Snow puffed up where he vanished. Kowalski and I threw ourselves flat behind a rotted log, scanning tree shadows for muzzle flash. Nothing. Just the wind and the echo ricocheting off distant trunks. "I calling out," called Barnes. Long pause. No answer. We belly-crawled to the depression where he fell. The slope dipped into a drainage ditch, now hidden beneath crusty white. At the bottom lay Barnes on his side, jacket blooming dark from the shoulder down. Snowflakes spotted the blood, melting, then freezing again, forming ruby beads on ice. He was breathing, fast, ragged. When he tried to shift, pain bent him like paper. I slid in, knees skidding, slapped gauze on the wound, pressed until crimson leaked between fingers and steam curled in the cold. Concerned, "Through and through?" I asked. He grimaced, shook his head, painfully. "Feels parked inside." Sarcastic. "Lucky me." I keyed the radio, breath hitching. "Urgent. Need stretcher team at grid Goose Egg Niner 2. Man down. Shoulder hit. Ditch depth 5 feet. Radio static. Static absolutized my fear. No acknowledgement. I tried again. The set wheezed, but no voice returned. Either jamming or splinter damage from last night had swallowed our frequency. Kowalski peered over the rim. The ditch faced a shallow clearing with direct line of sight to German positions. Any stretcher party would be skylined for snipers. He swore under his breath. Frustrated, "We drag him ourselves, or he freezes while HQ debates maps." Barnes tried to joke, weakly. "At least I'm lying down for Christmas dinner." But the sentence curdled into a whimper when the wind touched his wound. Frost already rimmed the edges of the gauze pad like lace. I inspected the ditch walls, icy soil over roots slick as glass. Climbing with a wounded man would be like scaling a buttered slide. A broken fence post jutted nearby, half buried. I hacked it free with an entrenching tool, lashed 2 ponchos into a crude sling, looped commo wire for handles. Improvised stretcher, courtesy of Fort Desperation. Getting him on took precision. Every lift coaxed fresh curses through clenched teeth. Blood soaked my gloves, turned gummy when exposed to air. At last Barnes lay cocooned in poncho folds, face pale as full moon, breath frosting lashes. He gripped my sleeve, weakly, pleading. "Radioman, don't let 'em gift wrap me for Berlin." Forced cheerfulness. "Only bow you'll get is a Purple Heart," I answered, forcing a grin that might convince us both. Together, Kowalski and I gripped the wire handles and heaved. The first tug pitched me onto my backside. The sled balked against crusty ridges. Muscles quivered, boots slipping. Above us, the ridgeline yawned like a theater stage, begging spotlight and German optics. No choice. We leaned into it, thighs burning, each step a gamble. Mid-slope rifle fire cracked. One shot, stingingly close, snow burst over my shoulder in a puff. Another zipped past, snapping the air inches from Kowalski's ear. He barked out a wordless growl and yanked harder. Barnes groaned, but hung on. We scrambled, half carrying, half sliding until the ditch lip swallowed beneath us, and we lurched onto flatter ground behind a blown tree stump. Heart punching ribs, I scanned the tree line. Shadows only, maybe the sniper repositioning, maybe just ghosts. I clawed at the radio dial, begging for signal. Miraculously, a thin carrier wave surfaced under the static. Shouted, straining. I shouted call signs until a corporal somewhere picked up. Breathless, I relayed our location. Status, urgent, 1 wounded, require evac sled, cover fire if able. He promised flares for distraction. Then the line fizzled again. We couldn't wait. Twilight already bruised the horizon. Temp would crash soon, turning blood to jelly in the wound. Our foxhole was 200 yards downhill across churned snow patterned by shell craters. No cover, but dusk. We reset grips. Labored breathing. My legs felt carved from lead, lungs rasping like broken bellows. Wind howled, flinging powder into bare skin, each fleck a pinprick of cold fire. But we moved, step, drag, step. Poncho sled whispering across frozen ruts. Barnes drifted in and out, lips murmuring lines from some Jersey jukebox tune. I answered with fragments of silent night, voice cracked raw, hoping cadence kept us timed. Halfway, star shells burst behind German lines. Divisions promised distraction. Blue-white glare washed the field, silhouettes dancing huge on snow. Spurts of MG fire probed the light, but rounds sailed wide, chasing ghosts. The universe for one shining minute was theater. Shadows expanding, flakes glittering, wounded friends suspended between ground and sky. We reached the company wire just as flares fizzled. Friendly voices hauled us over the barrier, hands lifting Barnes onto a genuine stretcher this time. Doc Tate arrived, needle poised, last morphine ampule like a slender miracle. He plunged it into Barnes's thigh. Relief softened tight lines around the kid's eyes. He exhaled a breath that looked warmer than any stove. As medics hustled him toward aid dugout, snow began again, large, lazy flakes, drifting under the first evening stars. I watched until poncho edges vanished behind rubble. Kowalski sagged against the parapet, breath whistling. "Buddy better live," he said. "Whole world down to about 10 people I care to drink with, and he's one." My knees threatened mutiny, but the radio crackled again. Fresh intel, German armor massing for night barrage. The reprieve had ended before blood on my gloves melted. I keyed a reply with hands that trembled from exhaustion and adrenaline, then leaned on the parapet, staring into a forest buried under velvet dusk. Somewhere back there, the sniper who'd tried to orphan Barnes still watched, scope glinting like a single, hateful star. Somewhere closer, Doc Tate's lantern bobbed, promising a pulse's stubborn persistence. And all around, the wind carried the rattle of mess tins and the far boom of howitzers retuning for their nightly concerto. I wiped a smear of frozen blood from the handset, tucked it close, and listened to the batteries hum, weak but alive. The night would belong to mortars and hunger, but at least one friend still breathed because we'd wrestled him from the snow. Tomorrow's battles could claim us all. That debt was written in sky. For now, one victory, small, crimson, and shivering, beat back the darkness a single heartbeat further. Behind me, somewhere in the timber ruins, a pine cracked and toppled under the weight of ice. The thud rolled across the clearing like a muted drum roll, promising the next act in this relentless show. I whispered into the handset, more prayer than message. "Stay with us, Barnes. We're not done telling jokes yet." Then I faced the forest again, waiting for the first shell of the night's barrage, knowing it would come, knowing it would carve the sky, and knowing I would still be here to report the scream, one word at a time. The first round screamed overhead before I could even swallow the breath I'd taken to steady myself. A low moan, then the air ripped sideways, furnace-hot shock waves slamming the parapet, snow and gravel stinging my cheek like a swarm of bees. I ducked, palms flat against frozen dirt, heart thudding in every joint. Seconds later came the follow-ups. German gunners walking their pattern down the ridge in tidy 5-second steps. Whistle, smash. Eardrums fluttered. Whistle, smash. Foxholes to my left vanished in fountains of snow, then reappeared as smoking ditches. Someone screamed, a short panicked bark that ended too soon. The night lit in orange pulses, each flash turning the shattered pines into skeleton fingers clawing at the sky. I jammed the handset against my ear, static louder than the barrage, like the set was trying to outshout artillery. "Bluebird to Thunder 2-1, taking heavy, danger close, grid 6465, adjust fire." My words disintegrated into the roar. I wasn't sure anything left the wire, so I cranked again, wrist raw, and repeated the plea. The answer arrived 5 shells later, thin but real. "Shot. Over." Blessed words. I yelled it down the line, voice cracking. Men huddled deeper, counting seconds. 12, 13. 4 sheets of light erupted in the dark where our 105s landed. Great fiery fists that punched the German guns off their rhythm. The incoming whistle staggered, then paused, like a giant gulping surprise. But the pause lasted only long enough for them to aim lower. New howls raked the tree stumps, detonating just above ground. Shrapnel buzzed waist-high, slicing through frozen coats as if they were onion skin. I felt a tug at my pant leg, hot sting, then numbness. Looked down, a neat slit through the fabric, blood darkening quick. Flesh wound, lucky. Kowalski crawled over, helmet sheared clean along one brim. He pressed a hand to the dent, eyes wide. "Trees going to finish what shells don't. Tell the trees to take a number." I tried humor, voice shaky. He grinned anyway, teeth ghost white in flare glow. Across the field, star shells lifted. Flaming umbrellas crackling overhead, drenching no man's land in bluish glare. In their light, I saw why the barrage felt personal. German infantry were already moving, hunched forms advancing in disciplined bounds. Armor stayed back. This was a grinder, meant for flesh alone. "Fix bayonets," an NCO hollered down the trench. Asterisks of steel winked along the line. cold stars answering those overhead. My Thompson's mag held maybe 15 rounds. After that, it was knife work and profanity. Flat, resigned. I gave HQ one last coordinate update, then slung the radio so the handset dangled loose, ready for panicked grabs. Snow vibrated beneath palms. As dozens of boots pounded closer, our first rifle volley broke the night like a pane of brittle glass. German shapes dropped, others sprawled, but the wave kept flowing. They reached the wire. Tin can alarms clanged wildly, then fell silent as cutters snipped strands and men kicked stakes aside. Flares guttered out, darkness swallowed detail, leaving only muzzle flashes. Ours bright, steady, theirs short, strobe fast. I fired the Thompson in careful pairs, felt each recoil shudder my wounded leg, smelled cordite mixing with coppery blood. Slide locked back, empty. A shadow vaulted the wire ahead of me, tall, blur of gray wool. I stabbed with the barrel, felt fabric yield, heard a grunt. Shadow toppled into the trench, landing beside me with a wet crunch. My hand shook. I yanked the bolt, slapped in the last mag, whispering, urgent, 8 bullets, choose wisely. Barnes should have been here with the bar, but he lay under morphine in the aid dugout, and realization felt like ice water in the lungs. I edged toward Kowalski's position, half crawl, half stumble. He and 2 others were firing in rotation to conserve clips. One shoots, one reloads, one prays. A new, deeper boom rolled from the forest, the cough of Nebelwerfers. We knew the rhythm now, 6 rockets per rack, shriek like banshees. "Incoming!" someone yelled. We flattened. The rockets screamed overhead, exploding 30 yards behind, blanketing the reserve trench in flame. Heat licked the back of my neck. Sparks drifted into the foxhole, hissing out on snow. The ground assault hesitated amid its own chaos. Our line answered with rifle grenades. Thump, thump. Green streaks arcing through the smoke. A few landed sweet, flipping bodies into snowy ruts. Others fizzled harmlessly. Half hidden in smoke, German officers blew whistles, mustering courage for another dash. I crawled to the top of the trench for a peek. Figures milled in confusion outside the broken wire, some clutching ears bleeding from rockets, others trying to guide machine gun teams forward. I snatched the handset, keyed up division again. Urgent. "Canister shot if you've got it. Range 63.8. Big honeycomb of targets." The reply, calm. Negative canister, last of HE on the way. So be it. I relayed corrections until our 105s bracketed the cluster. Bursts walked left to right, tearing white fountains from the frozen ground. Men scattered, some falling flat, some running back into tree shadows. One shell landed dead center on an MG tripod, spraying black fragments like insect legs. Suddenly the rush became a trickle. Then nothing but wounded cries fading into the hiss of settling powder. For a span you could have heard a match strike. Snowflakes drifted again, powdering the fresh dead, muting the forest to a church-like hush. Breath clouded before my eyes, slow and heavy, heartbeat thudding through eardrum bruises. A runner slid into our hole, cheeks striped with soot. Strained. "Perimeter intact. North sector less lucky. Armor punctured the ditch near the rail line." He pointed with his chin. Urgent. "Colonel wants radio there, pronto!" My stomach pinched. The rail line lay 500 yards through open yards chewed by rockets. Wincing. "Legs hit!" I gestured at the bloody slit. Stern, no radio, no counterfire. Pick your poison. He was gone before I could argue. Kowalski checked my wound. Ugly slice, but not gushing. He tied a compress, yanked it tight until stars danced in my vision. "You can limp," he said, determined. "I'll carry the spare batteries." We set off, two figures in a wasteland of craters glowing faintly under starlight. Each step jostled the radio, each jolt stabbing fire up my thigh. Around us, mortar smoke drifted in lazy curtains, giving the moonlight a milky halo. Somewhere behind, Christmas carols still tumbled from that warped PA speaker, now slowed by damaged vinyl. Voices drooping into eerie dirges that echoed across ruin like ghosts harmonizing. Halfway to the railbed, we passed the aid dugout. Barnes lay inside, blanket to chin, eyes half-lidded. He spotted me, lifted two fingers. I forced a grin, tapped my helmet brim in salute, and kept hobbling. Couldn't trust my voice not to crack. Ahead, the rail embankment loomed, jagged silhouette of twisted ties and half-buried cars. Muzzle flashes winked along its crest where our boys tried to claw back a breach. As we drew near, the smell of diesel and scorched steel thickened, burning half-tracks, maybe one of ours, maybe theirs. Doesn't matter at midnight. We scrambled into a communications slit trench just as a flare burst overhead, bleached everything bone white. For an instant, I saw the scene. Two knocked-out Shermans ablaze on the tracks. Silhouettes of panzers angled nose down in shell holes. Infantry on both sides crouched like opposing statues. Art caught in freeze frame. Then the flare died. Black poured back, and firing resumed. I dropped to my knees beside the sector leader, a captain with grime painting every pore. He thrust a map stub at me. Urgent. "Need divisional guns on that tree line. Armor forming for another push." I thumbed the handset, miracle still working, and called the grid. Shells answered sooner than fear, slamming the cops, sending spiral columns of fire and bark skyward. The tanks there stalled, tracks chewing snow but going nowhere. One gun barrel drooped, molten. Yet still the enemy pushed. Infantry poured around the wrecks, using them as moving bunkers. Our boys were down to 3 clips each. I could feel confidence thinning like ice beneath spring melt. That's when the sky far west pulsed, a deep, thunderous rumble, not of artillery, but radial engines, all heads tilted. A second rumble joined, then another, until the air vibrated like taut drumskin. Somebody yelled, "Thunderbolts!" Spotlights of magnesium popped along the German flank, and twin-tailed shapes swooped in, P-47s braving night under moon-frosted clouds. They dove low, 6 of them, 50 cals stuttering red diamonds. Tracers stitched the rail cars, marched across the frozen meadow, raked the stalled panzers until vision blurred under the strobolite carnage. Rockets flared from underwing rails, 4 streaks, 4 blossoms, each grafting fire to dark. The captain's mouth fell half open. I shouted grids into the radio, voice drowned by engine roar. Still I shouted, to adjust friend lies, to warn pilots of our lines, to beg more. One thunderbolt peeled left, soared over our trench close enough to rattle helmet rivets, pilot's canopy silvered bright by flames below. In that instant, I saw a gloved hand raised, thumb up, before the plane banked into the night. Shelling from the German side faltered, then stuttered out. Small arms crackled on for minutes, hesitant, like coals popping after the log's collapse. Finally, even that softened into sporadic sniping, more spite than tactic. The P-47s vanished west, engines fading into the same hush that had begun the terror hours before. Slumped against the trench wall. Leg throbbed, ears rang, radio hissed. Quiet. Obedient. The captain patted my shoulder. Perimeter's ours again. For now. His smile looked like it belonged to a much older man. Behind us, a bell tolled. Only one of its 3 notes survived, but it rang stubborn, echoing across the rails. Christmas Eve edging toward dawn, and Bastogne still breathed. I keyed the handset, summoned every fraction of strength left, and sent the update. Line holds. Enemy repelled. Air support effective. Ammunition critical, but spirits high. Thunder 2-1 replied with 3 short clicks before fading. Confirmation enough. Somewhere beyond the horizon, trucks might already be grinding toward us with shells and bread and new batteries. Or maybe not. Hope's a vagrant. Shows up uninvited. Leaves the same. Kowalski sank beside me. Back to timber, eyes closing despite the gunfire echoes, warm glowing in distance. I let my head tip back, snowflakes kissing lashes. For a breath, the forest smelled oddly clean. Smoke blown clear by high winds, scorch buried under fresh white. Then, from the southern tree line, a single flare clawed skyward. Red, bleeding sparks, hanging like a wound that wouldn't clot. Under its dim glow, silhouettes moved. Slow tide of troops massing again, bayonets catching the flare's blood-red sheen. The night was not finished. I reached for the crank, knuckles splitting anew, and felt the radio hum awake. Words formed on my tongue, new grids, new pleas. As the flare died and darkness rushed back, I exhaled one promise into the handset. Half order, half prayer. We're still here. The flare's red afterglow still pulsed across the backs of my eyelids when the forest erupted again, this time not in steel, but in sound. A chorus of engines, deep-throated and rolling, crept up from the southern road like distant thunder stalking the ground. At first, I braced for panzers, breath snagging the cut in my leg. But the note was wrong, lower, steadier, carried on a rhythm more familiar than fear. Half-tracks, American half-tracks mixed with Shermans, their exhausts barking in the cold. Somewhere down the line a trooper whooping whooped, the cry slicing through night like a bayonet through canvas. I jammed the handset to my ear. The net, moments ago a wasteland of static, suddenly crackling with voices overlapping in pure disbelief. Task Force Cherry reaching outskirts, headlights blacked, over. Friendly armor South Gate, belts loaded, watch your arcs, boys. I blinked snow from lashes. Repeat your last, I barked, voice breaking. Friendly armor, I say again, 3rd Army armor pushing to contact. The operator on the other end laughed, giddy, cracked, like a man slipping on ice yet loving the fall. Kowalski's head snapped up. Patton? Awestruck, Patton, I confirmed, though saying the name felt like speaking a rumor too bold to own. My breath fogged the handset grill, turning to frost. Another flare rose, green this time, fired by our own forward scouts to mark safe lanes. Its glow washed the orchard, revealing silhouettes of Shermans trundling past the wrecked railcars, turrets swiveling like curious dogs sniffing unfamiliar yard. Infantry clung to the hulls, wool coats flapping, faces crusted with road salt. Behind them, long snakes of deuce-and-a-halfs lurched, tires smothered in chains, canvas tops shimmering with rime. Snow mist billowed around treads, the exhaust turning twilight into a low-lit steam bath. The fresh armor's grind shook frozen timbers, and for the briefest heartbeat, I mistook the tremor for fear. No, relief has a vibration all its own, and the ground thrummed with it now. The Germans felt it too. Their rifles rattled off nervous bursts, tracers zipping over tank bows, but the Shermans answered with coax slugs that stitched orange stitches through the trees. High over the din, a 90mm opened, boom, its muzzle flash whitewashing every ruin. One shell toppled a pine that had survived 3 barrages, the trunk folding like wet chalk. I hauled the radio up the embankment, legs screaming each step, and found what used to be a 2-story brick bakery now serving as forward traffic control. An MP waved an air-ground lamp through a jagged window frame, signaling column directions into town. His face glowed ghost green. He spotted my antenna and shoved a mug toward me. Black liquid sloshing, smelling of diesel and chicory. 3rd Army coffee, he grinned. Tastes like victory, if victory were brewed in a radiator. Steam thawed my mustache in seconds. The warmth hit my chest like a hand grenade of comfort, and I nearly wept. Behind us, the rail embankment rattled again, German guns saluting the newcomers. Shrapnel pinged off Sherman glaciers, dull as hail on barn tin. The tanks answered without hesitation, main guns booming point-blank into muzzle flashes. Fireballs punched holes in the winter dark, each blast briefly tattooing pine trunks with orange runes. I keyed the handset. Bluebird to Thunder 2-1. Friendly armor breaching perimeter at South Road. Request corridor grids for supply trucks. Division answered fast, clipping orders sharp. Open corridor, East 117 to Plaza. Guide Red Ball Express. Medical evac priority. Numb fingers found the signal lamp lever. I flashed the grids to the MP, who relayed them down the convoy by semaphore. Within minutes, the first 6x6 rattled past, Red Cross canvas sides slapping. Stretchers jammed every inch. The driver tossed a crate of bandages off the tailgate mid-roll. It skidded, split, white gauze unraveling across snow like fresh hope. Engine growls multiplied. Ammunition lorries followed, tarps bulging over 30-06 cases, artillery rounds stenciled HE 1944. One truck bed overflowed with jerry cans of gasoline, the fluid sloshing like captured sunshine. Another carried nothing but mail bags, khaki sacks stamped with states that suddenly felt real again. Ohio, New Jersey, Texas. I touched the nearest one, felt letters within, and for a second, the tough part of me loosened dangerously. German mortars lobbed harassing shells. but newfound M16 half-tracks swiveled quad 50s skyward, scything air with red tracers. Each barrel flash illuminated the carrier crews, grins wide, eyes crazed, shouting Christmas carols off-key, while brass cascaded into knee-deep drifts. The mortar tubes across the riverbank coughed once more, then fell silent. At dawn's ragged edge, the blizzard clouds parted as if Patton had bribed the weather itself. A weak sun edged over the treetops, painting ice crystals gold. In that widening halo, I saw a jeep skidding beside the bakery stump, white star fresh on the hood. A brigadier, Cherry, rumor held, climbed out, boots crunching. He looked at the ruined town, the torch-blackened pines, and he laughed, short, incredulous. Amused. "Hell of a snow globe you boys built," he said, confident. "Mind if we shake it up?" No one could answer. Our throats knotted behind smiles too big to fit. He slapped my radio pack. "Urgent. Line me to division." I passed the handset. Firmly. His message was simple. "Bastogne relieved. Armor inside. Push Kraut guns to the Merce." The phrase, "Bastogne relieved," slapped every tired face brighter than that newborn sun. Somewhere behind the church bell, just the one note still alive, gonged a shaky celebration. Cheering. Paratroopers who'd spent 8 nights counting shells now cheered into the wind, voices cracking from cold and disbelief. Hoarsely, infantry hopped off tank decks, boots crunching cobblestones, trading fresh K rations for directions to foxholes. Someone yanked open a crate labeled oranges, Florida fruit flown to France, snow cold and perfect, and lobbed them like grenades of sweetness down the line. I caught one, peeled it with shaking nails, juice stinging cuts, and tasted summer in December. Barnes, arm in sling, shuffled up under Doc Tate's watch. Morphine haze gone, pain glinting in his eyes, but he grinned when he saw the armor. Satisfied. "Told you Patton would bring dinner." He bit my orange, juice trailing his chin, and for once didn't wince. Gunfire hadn't vanished. Pockets of Germans still clung to ridge bunkers, and distant artillery traded blows. But the tide had shifted. We could see it, smell it. Diesel instead of cordite, confidence instead of fear. Even the wind's howl changed pitch, less accusation, more exhausted lullaby. I limped toward the new commo tent being pitched near the square, radio crackling at my hip. Supply clerks in fresh gloves handed out dry socks like benedictions. A cook set up a field stove. Bacon sizzled, the aroma so normal it felt alien. I realized I hadn't heard the rumble in my stomach for days, only because gunfire had drowned it. Stomach rumbles. Now the silence let hunger speak. Over the net came a final order. "Hold position! Consolidate! Prepare to advance!" The word advance rang in my skull. Forward instead of backward. Hope instead of weather forecasts. I keyed acknowledgement, then paused. Static whispered, faint but insistent, and beneath it, a voice I recognized. The German operator who days ago had mocked us with surrender terms. Now his tone shook, words rapid, pleading for artillery correction on coordinates further north, some other fight already slipping away. Funny how fast fortune flips its coin. I closed the handset without answering and stepped outside. Snowflakes still drifted, but sunlight turned each into a spark. Shermans lumbered past, treads grinding ice into slush. A medic jeep roared toward the casualty dugout. red crosses bright as cardinals in winter. Above it all, a flight of C-47s appeared, olive specks towing white parachutes in their bellies. This time daylight drops, broad and arrogant. Crates tumbled, chutes blossomed. No one sprinted. There was no need. We could gather them in daylight now, with rifles slung easy. I looked to the forest, where broken pines still leaned, their bark charred, limbs sheared bare. Wind sighed through the wreckage, the sound softer, less vengeful, like old men settling after rage spent. I breathed in resin, diesel, bacon fat, felt the radio's weight lighten on my shoulders. Barnes called from the church steps, "Radioman! There's short a voice in the chow line. You coming, or you still flirting with that Static?" I tapped my headset, smiled. Static and I filed for divorce. Kowalski winked, hauling a box of ammo stamped "Today, 25 December 1944. Merry Christmas, Pruitt. Thought we might not get you anything." He tossed me a bandolier. I caught it. Solid, heavy, a future measured in copper and lead instead of doubt. Wind gusted, rattling empty shell casings on the frozen ground, their clink now an afterthought, not a dirge. I slung the Thompson behind my back, felt the orange slice sticky on my glove, and limped toward the smell of bacon, boots crunching snow that no longer felt like a shroud. Behind me, engines revved, shells thundered somewhere beyond the rising sun, and the battered bell rang its single stubborn note, over and over, not funeral, never that, but a ragged reveille for the living. We were still here, and the world, against every wager, had come to find us. Sunlight kept climbing, slow and tentative, as though it too feared the Ardennes might still swat it from the sky. With every inch the light gained, Bastogne's color shifted, from iron gray to bruised lavender to a sort of tarnished gold that clung to broken roof tiles and the dented helmets of tankers refueling in the square. The storm-gouged clouds pushed east, leaving behind a ceiling of pale blue veined with vapor trails, half-erased signatures of thunderbolts already banking for home. Combat engineers spread through town like carpenters after a tornado, stringing fresh wire, marking mines with neat triangles of yellow cloth, sawing splintered joists so the streets wouldn't decapitate the first driver who looked down instead of up. Their axes clacked a measured rhythm, an accidental hymn that overrode the lingering echo of artillery. Each swing rattled loose icicles the size of bayonets. They shattered on cobblestones in crystalline applause. My new orders were almost anticlimactic. Stay alive, keep the net coherent, coordinate outbound medevac. The radio spectrum, once a swamp of static and screaming codes, had calmed to an orderly murmur. Call signs trading grid references, tank commanders laughing too loud over open channels, a medic somewhere reading pulse rates the way a priest might recite psalms. I perched on the tailgate of a red-ball GMC, headset crooked over one ear, leg bandaged so stiff it felt like lumber. The smell of diesel, hot brass, and frying bacon braided together, heady enough to make a man forget the winter for 3 full breaths. Lines formed at anything that promised comfort, soup kettles, mail sacks, a chaplain spritzing something he swore was bourbon into tin cups. Two GIs bartered an unopened can of fruit cocktail for a single camel. Nearby, a pair of cooks shoved a full fruitcake, candied cherries intact, into a kettle of creamed chipped beef, declaring the result sardonically, "Holiday surprise." No one protested. When you've eaten pine-smoked pork fat thickened with powdered milk, even sacrilege tastes divine. Barnes hobbled over on borrowed crutches, sling tucked tight around his patched shoulder. His grin looked less fevered, though shock still peeked behind the eyes. "Doc says I keep the slug. Souvenir." He tapped the wound, winced theatrically, and presented a grimy envelope. Eagerly. "Mail call." My mother's handwriting marched across the paper, steady and patient. Sunlit descriptions of ration stamps, church socials, neighbors knitting scarves. Her worry folded politely between the lines, like lavender pressed in a hymn book. Never mentioned, always fragrant. She'd included a picture. The family porch draped with tinsel. My kid brother, in an oversized parka, mocking a paratrooper jump from the top step. I traced the photo's edge with a thumb blackened by cordite and wondered if the porch boards in Ohio creaked like Bastogne's frozen rafters had creaked under shells. An MP blew a whistle, 2 shrill blasts signaling the first outbound ambulance convoy. I keyed the microphone over radio. "Snowman column rolling, 10 stretchers, route green, over." Headquarters answered with a curtly, "Roger." The trucks lurched forward, chains clanging, tailgates swaying under white-sheeted figures. Barnes watched until they dipped behind a heap of rubble, swallowing our friends from view. Phew. He exhaled hard, wearily. "There goes the worst Christmas gift exchange in history." Afternoon slid toward evening, the sun a flattened coin wedged between treetops. Relief, like morphine, dulled pain, but couldn't stitch wounds. Already reports floated in that Kraut artillery regrouped 5 miles out, licking chops. Patton's armor wasn't a finish line, just a fresh batter to swap in when one boxer sagged. The high brass called it momentum. To the man with an empty clip, it felt like the universe asking for change after you'd handed over your last dime. Engineers detonated a captured ammo dump outside town. The blast punched a mushroom of smoke so clean and white it looked like a newborn cloud. Under that rising plume, I met Cherry's signal officer, Captain Reeves, a lanky Georgian with a voice all syrup and sandpaper. He needed a comms bridge between tank columns pivoting north and our artillery net to the west, fast, before dusk masked landmarks. My set still limped on a kinked antenna held in place by field rations tape, but it worked. We hijacked the belfry again, this time by ladder, no shells tracing arcs overhead. The staircase smelled of candle wax and pigeon droppings. Daylight filtered through the St. Michael window, now just jagged confetti. Reeves climbed behind, breath issuing clouds. Above, the single surviving bell rope swung in the breeze, bumping the bronze mouth once every minute. Soft, off-tempo. We mounted the antenna through a hole the mortar had punched, lashed it to a beam scorched by tracer fire. I cranked the generator, the set hummed like a cat finally granted hearth access. Signals pinged across the valley. Sherman 6 clicks out. Tank destroyers ferrying civilian evacuees. Medics needing fresh plasma where road ice stranded their truck. Rees relayed coordinates, voice calm, slipping yawl between bearings as naturally as breaths. Mid-call, movement below caught my eye. A line of German POWs herded past the church, their field gray coats dusted white. They shuffled single file, bobbing like overgrown children forced to join a picnic parade. Some cradled bandaged arms, others stared at cobblestones, refusing to see the bell tower that had refused them. One young prisoner, no older than my brother, looked up. Our gazes held a beat too long. I felt an acid twinge behind the sternum, not guilt, not pride, just the raw recognition of another life paused mid-sentence. Reeves clicked off his handset, nodding satisfaction. "Roads are ours till they ain't," he declared, tugging his scarf higher. Snow crystals glimmered on the wool like cheap sequins. "Could use that bell about now. Ring up a proper Christmas service." I tugged the rope. The bell clanged, throat bruised but game. One note, another, echo catching in rafters. Each peal rippled across the square where troopers froze mid-ladle, heads lifting. The sound rolled down alleys choked with snow, floated across field kitchens, reached the aid station where Barnes sat propped, IV dripping hope. His grin, I'm told later, blossomed at hearing it, proof the town's heart still beat. Twilight deepened. From the tower, we spotted artillery flashes far off. Krauts shelling retreat routes to slow Patton's northward hook. Their explosions bloomed like ink blotches on the horizon, muffled by distance. Reeves scribbled notes, muttering calculations of range tables, but my focus drifted to the sky. More C-47s. Smaller specks now, flying west, empty. They banked in twilight, wings catching alpenglow, silhouettes crisp against violet dusk. I'd almost forgotten what a contrail looked like when nobody was shooting at it. Cold cramped our fingers. We clambered down, each step jolting my stitched leg. At ground level, Reeves trotted toward the tank column, new orders crackling in his fist. I limped opposite, following the scent of something miraculous. Real coffee. Fresh ground, dripping through a battered percolator balanced on a steel helmet atop a potbelly stove. Cooks ladled dark salvation into mess cups, handing out sugar cubes hoarded since Normandy. I cradled mine, warmth bleeding through gloves. Steam fogging goggles hung at my neck. Around the stove a circle formed, mixed batch. Tankers, paratroopers, a medic with fingers splinted like pickets, an engineer sporting scorch marks on both sleeves. Conversation drifted from rumors of Paris leave to wagers on when the line of replacement troops might finally catch up. Nobody mentioned the men still lying under tarps at the aid post or the Germans regrouping beyond the ridge. The future, for 15 stolen minutes, sat no farther away than the bottom of a tin mug. Night climbed, but this time the dark carried no overture of shells, only the distant clack of tank engines idling as mechanics fit charcoal-lined blankets over blocks to keep oil from freezing. Somewhere a harmonica nudged Auld Lang Syne into the smoke-tinged air, off-key, yet flawless in intent. A few men hummed along. One or two wiped eyes with sleeves, hiding tears or melted snow, hard to say. We all stared into the stove's glow until the coals looked like small suns rising from ash. I finished my coffee, nails tapping the tin rhythmically, same beat as generator cranks hammered into muscle memory. An officer called "Lights out," urging rest before tomorrow's pursuit. Pursuit. The word felt surreal, like telling a drowning man to prepare for a foot race. But I wasn't drowning anymore. None of us were. I made my way toward a makeshift barracks, a wine cellar swept free of glass and ghosts, radio slung lighter than ever. Snow squeaked under boots, but the sound lacked menace now. It was just winter speaking its native tongue. Before ducking into the cellar, I paused, glancing east where the forest shadows fused into a single charcoal blot. High above, stars glittered, sharp, innumerable, unbothered by the scabs of war below. I took a breath so deep it hurt, tasted pine, diesel, coffee, gunpowder, orange rind, a recipe for survival none of the manuals ever printed. Inside, men already snored amid barrel racks. I unrolled a blanket, eased down, radio cradled beside like a faithful mutt. As eyelids sagged, a final thought flickered. The ether might stay calm tonight, but come dawn, it would fill again. Call signs leapfrogging across frequencies, coordinates barking like drill sergeants. We'd chase an enemy, still sharp, still dangerous, through snow that remembered every footprint. But tomorrow, for the first time in 8 nights, the chase would be ours. My last coherent sensation was the blanket's coarse wool, scratching stubble, and the bell outside striking its single off-key note one more time, not as an alarm, but as a promise that the world beyond the cellar door would still exist when morning unlocked our eyes.